let's start from beginning. Your phrase, which made a huge impression on me. You compared light design for the opera, for the performance, with cinema and camera, which is following area or character on stage. Could you be more specific on this topic, light design and work of cameraman? So this means that actually a light designer picks up attention and really goes through the performance with audience. This is one of the most important leading persons for the audience on stage.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a definite similarity between cinematic work and the work that the lighting designer does in the theatre, in a number of ways. Lighting design needs to, and does in fact, to play a huge part in telling the story, telling the narrative, imparting that, and we do that. We do that in a number of ways. We do that visually by thinking of a big stage, for example, as being in a way like a wide shot. For example, with Vilnius Opera, you know, you're very often looking at as many as 70 people on stage. So you kind of regard that as the wide shot. And so you want everybody to see the bigger picture. But then within that, there are moments when we have to draw attention to one person or two people within that particular scene. So if you think of it in terms of a movie, it would be a wide shot on the movie. But then when we want to particularly look at somebody, we, if you like, zoom in on the camera. And although you can't make the stage literally any smaller, you can make the attention, what you're looking at, smaller. So you, by closing in, you literally zoom in on something. You tell the audience what they should be looking at. If you were doing that within a movie, you would be editing, you'd be mixing, you would be literally going in, and all you see on the screen is somebody's face or somebody's half body or whatever. And because you can't do that on the stage in a literal sense, you do it, the lighting designer very often fulfills the role of doing that by closing in on something, so that the emphasis is there. But also, there's also a similarity with editing a film as well, because again, when we change a lighting state, we're kind of doing the equivalent of creating a cut or an edit or a mix, or a color change or an atmospheric change. And that can be a dramatic thing, you know, as a result of what somebody's saying or doing. It can also, particularly within the opera world, be a musical thing, so that the timing of a change is a musical event in itself. So just as the music is describing a narrative, so the visual can describe a narrative, you know, within the background of a set or the environment or the design or whatever the rest of the design is. We can actually close in and change that. And again, use that to draw attention, but also to change atmosphere, you know, to change, sometimes even to change where you are, to change a location without physically changing it, but changing it in sometimes a geographic sense, but also in an emotional sense, in a response to music. So I think there is, I mean, I've worked in film as well as in theatre, and I see very much a similar, not exactly a similar aesthetic, but a similar technique, if you like, of drawing attention. You draw attention to certain things in order to expand and explore the narrative. And that's exactly what lighting design is doing within the theatre. Is that any clearer?
Of course. I would like to continue on that, because it is said that the stage set scenography is dead without light, and light brings a stage to life. If we would look to the process of working together with stage director, set designer, costumes, orchestra, when it is time for lights to come up and to join?
Well, the light in a sense is always there because you can't see anything without light, but I know what you mean. Using light as a creative medium, which is what I would say we do now. You use like paint, you use it as a medium of expression in that sense. Where you come into the process varies, but generally it's fairly early on. I think that's what you're talking about, isn't it? Is where that actually comes in. The preparation is slightly different. I mean, I will get involved in meetings with the rest of the creative team from very early on, but a set designer will be producing a model, for example, drawings. The costume designer will also be producing drawings. So they're able to show the director and me what they're aiming at. They've got a visual reference. My preparation period is slightly different, and I think I said this in interview with somebody when we were talking about the Faust here, that my drawing will be quite technical. But for me, I'm creating a palette to work with. So by designing where the lights are going to be placed, sometimes what color they might be. And nowadays we use lights that can change the color within the light without using what we used to call filters or gels. But I would prepare that, and I prepare that in relationship to what I know the set is going to be, because we'll have plans of that, and what I know the costumes are going to be, and I'll prepare that as a response. I mean, I very much regard the set as in a sense a canvas for what I do. Not to denigrate that at all, but I know that I can change things. I know that I can make something have a lot of different looks, depending on, maybe as simple as when it's nighttime or when it's daytime, or when we go into something much more expressionist, and I want to do something which is not naturalistic, but is still on that same set. So I look at the set as respectfully, but as a canvas for what I will then do. So my work, in a sense, is in preparation, is much more inside my head. I have to be very careful what I say about how I think the lighting might look when I'm talking to my collaborators, because inevitably, if I describe something, they will be seeing something different in their heads. So I try to keep it in a not too specific area until we get into the theatre. And really, if I've done my preparation properly, if I've got the palette to work with that I want, then really my creative work happens when we're actually on the stage. So I always say that lighting in that sense is a melding of performance and surface and the other things that the other designers have contributed. It's the glue that sticks them together. And of course, at the forefront of that is the performance itself, because we're not just there to make pretty pictures, we're there to illuminate a performance and see what's going on, but also to give it an added resonance and an added understanding, perhaps, for an audience. I mean, certainly on some of the things that we've done in Lithuania, being quite quite experimental and quite expressionist sometimes. Coming out of naturalism because it's appropriate to a certain moment, and just into something which is much more expressionist and sometimes even abstract. So it fulfills. Yeah, go on.
We'll talk a bit later about Lithuanian experiences, but actually that catches me most in the beginning. You're talking about canvas and painting on canvas. That's really very inspiring, almost a quote from you. And following your idea about being exact and careful with your words, is it a myth or true requirement? For example, please increase light for 2%. First, I heard this term, this requirement, used by Robert Wilson.
Yeah.
That being sensitive in a level of percent, which is actually invisible for audience, but maybe that means that for audience is already aware of light designer work too, which is quite new thing in a theater of the last 40 years, maybe, when light designer is considered as a separate important person in performance.
Yeah, I mean, I think the last thing is absolutely true. It's something which has grown in importance, grown in a sense alongside technology, because you can look back to people like Appiah and Gordon Craig, who imagined light, imagined how they would. I mean, they did drawings that showed light sometimes that wasn't technically possible. Those things have become technically possible, and with that, the whole area of lighting design as an art form has evolved hugely over the last 40, 50 years. So yeah, that's true. I mean, what Robert Wilson is saying about degree, I think is very true and very interesting. But you work in a number of ways. Sometimes, I mean, with the technology that we have now, I can make a lighting cue last for 20, 25 minutes. And you would be watching it just as you might watch the sun moving across the sky or a cloud moving across the sun. And we take all of that for granted. I can now create cues which are like that, which are, have got lots of different parts happening, but it's all what we call one cue or one change, but very, very complicated. And I mean, that's fantastic. And an audience watching that probably wouldn't even know it was happening. But if they saw the beginning of that lighting image, of the image on stage, and they saw the end 20 minutes later, they would see that they'd actually been taken on a huge journey without almost knowing it. I mean, there are people obviously who do notice it, but in a sense, you're trying to create something which has a subliminal effect on an audience. And then other moments when you want to go crash, wham, bang, and they know they've got a lighting cue. There's a phrase on Broadway that says, no haze, no Tony, which is because, when you use haze in the air, it lights up the beams and suddenly everybody notices the light. And then it gets, but usually in a rather kind of blasé, in your face kind of way. But I think, and both things can be interesting. But I think it's fantastic to create something which has a kind of subtle influence on an audience without them even knowing it. They don't really kind of quite know where they're being taken, but then suddenly they've started in a bright place maybe and ended up in a kind of isolated, shadowy corner without even really feeling it happen. It's not like throwing a switch. It's something that we can now do very, very subtly, which is brilliant. I think that's what you mean. I think that's what Robert Wilson probably means, in the sense that degree, just taking 2% off, can change the way the audience can change the audience's perception. And that, of course, is very exciting and something that we try and do a lot.
Magic. So let's continue on Lithuania. You're also known as set designer, but I will have a specific question about set design in early 2000 when you worked here in Ballo in Maskera. But now let's continue on light and your experiences in Vilnius Congress Palace, which is actually even not a theatre stage. A quite complicated place to work in, and despite that, you created lights for Faust, for Queen of Spades, Werther, Onegin, Sweeney Todd. What was experience for you? Especially, it comes to your agenda between working in grand theaters like La Scala, Met, and then you're continuing on some tiny place, which is not a theatre stage at all.
Yeah, it's a tricky space, I have to say. It's not easy. I mean, I think the first thing we did there was Bohema, and they were very good. I mean, they allowed me to make quite a lot of differences to where you could put lights. The side structures, which have now been there for a long time, and a lot of the overhead grid is something that we designed and put in to improve all of that, because it was very much just a concert hall. I've always been interested in using non-theatrical spaces, actually. I began with an experimental theatre company in the UK, and for quite a few years, we didn't actually work in the theatre at all. We used to travel around to universities and spaces, and I designed a scaffolding structure which we would order from the local hire firm and build on arrival. Just had a big dance floor in the middle and scaffolding towers, so you could put things onto that Jeff Moore, who was the director of the company at the time, was very into sound. He would sit in one tower and I would sit in the other, operate. And we're going back to 1970s now, right? And he would operate sound on stage in view, and I would operate lighting, which would be very manual in those days, not computerized, and also projection, because we were using projection even then. And that setup traveled around. And so we would create our own space within whatever the venue was. It might be a sports hall, it might be a university concert hall, it might be, because, you know, a lot of these smaller venues didn't even exist then. So we created a venue wherever we went. So I've kind of always been interested in working in non-theatrical spaces. And I also think that, you know, even though one is designing, as you say, at the Met, and the Opera House in London, etc., all of that, which is wonderful and very exciting to do, it's incredibly important to also still keep working in other smaller spaces. And so I do. And I quite often work in quite small spaces in the UK as well from time to time. It kind of reminds you that you need to get a bit closer to it, and you need to find ways of making those spaces work. I mean, Dick Bird has done a fantastic job in the Congress Hall, you know, again, he's got the same kind of problem. He's got to make a space, it's an incredibly wide stage, it doesn't have an orchestra pit, you can't fly things out, and he's created incredibly inventive spaces there, which is what we've all had to do. So no, I mean, it's not an easy space, the Congress. And there's lots of things I'd still like to change there to improve it. But it's a worthwhile challenge, and it makes you question how you work when you haven't got all the facilities of some huge opera house. And hopefully you can still make exciting images.
Yeah. One of the first performances as a light designer in Vilnius was La Bohema. And I know that you even wanted to make a movie out of that performance. It was, let's say, a love with that performance. What was the story? What was so special about La Boheme and you?
Boheme was, it was kind of coming together, because I know you want to talk about Ballo, which we did originally in Trakai. But Boheme was the sort of first coming together of, I think, an incredibly talented group of performers under Dalia's leadership. And so it was also just a very magical production. And I think it sparked off a very interesting reaction, you know, in Lithuania and in Vilnius. It suddenly opened up the opera world to, well, not the opera world, but the rest of the world, the rest of the people, that this could be an enjoyable thing and not a distant thing, which sometimes it is in the larger opera houses. So I think we were all very excited about it. And also it was just a magical production. I mean, it really was brilliant. I mean, I've worked on a couple of other Bohemes, and I think that's the best one that I've ever worked on. And it's a beautiful piece. You know, it's got everything going for it. It's got very accessible music, a great story, and then you had these great, exciting young performers.
And even not too long opera.
No, not too long as well. That's true. It's absolutely true. But no, so I think we just got very excited about it, and we got very excited about the fact that we'd managed to contain the Congress Hall, you know, with Dick's very exciting set, you know, and we'd managed to make it into a theatre, you know, because I think when you go there, it does feel like a theatre. It's a different kind of theatre, but it was great. So I think it was a general excitement, and that was, of course, what triggered off the Bohemians, and then, you know, Vilnius City Opera. So yeah.
Actually, I mentioned Ballo in Maschera in Trakai in 2000 just because of one reason. I heard a very funny story that Juozas Statkevičius made costumes which were too big to fit stage door, you know, in the scenography on the set. So you didn't want to change the scenography, and Juozas didn't want to change the costumes. So do you remember the story? And actually, this leads to the question: who is more important, in that work.
I think Joseph is a genius. So, but you never know what's coming. I mean, it just arrives. Yeah, I know I said costume designers, you see a drawing, but you very rarely see a drawing in much advance from Joseph. But what comes out on stage is just pure genius. So you just have to kind of go with it. I don't remember, what did we do? We must have gotten through the door somehow, because they all got there.
I think you need to cut bigger door, and that's it.
I think so, yeah. I mean, there were lots of, that was a hell of a thing to put on. I mean, again, I had no flying facilities, so I designed floors that opened up into the next scene. These like huge kind of, well, they weren't doors, but they were like the whole floor just lifted up. So it gradually opened up layer after layer after layer. And we had these strange shapes that I designed that hung from the proscenium that could be sort of flown, but we were on a rock and roll stage out there. But again, that was amazing. I mean, those were the days when there wasn't really any stage management in Lithuania, and we had to train people up to do it. But what an event that was! That was incredible.
Actually, everything was needed to be made from scratch. Even management, as you say, and stage itself, and opera which is traveling and which is staged in a different place, and also the artistic approach was very different at that time. Okay, could we go back to your roots? Actually, I read that one of the first operas you worked with was Parsifal, and at the end of the 70s. And was it a mark of a scale for you, which later on was the kind of mark bench? What kind of light designer you are, and what scale usually you are choosing, where you feel most comfortable?
I mean, I didn't. There was no training for lighting designers, but I trained as a stage as a set designer. That was my actual training under a fantastic designer called Ralph Koltai. And Parsifal was the first opera that I actually designed, but for that I designed sets, lighting, and costume, because I'd been working with the experimental theatre company that I'd been working with up until that point. I was kind of designer. I was designing sets and not costumes very much, but everything basically. So Parsifal, I did design the whole lot. I mean, it was quite scary actually, because it was the first really kind of large scale thing in a theatre that I had done. I mean, I had the sort of knowledge and the training to work in a theatre, but that was the biggest one, and with a very famous maestro, Reginald Goodall. I think it was one of the last operas that he conducted, and of course you kind of launch into it with big bold ideas. I was going to have this lake, and the castle was going to come up out of the lake, and I hadn't really thought about how heavy water was till they said, well, that's fine, but we won't be able to take it anywhere without reinforcing the stages. So in the end we still had the lake. We had the lake, but not so deep, and then flew the castle down in from above onto the lake. So and it was very exciting to do. But I mean, it was a beginning in one sense. But really the majority of the work that I went to after that was really in the dance world. And in the 80s, I did a huge amount of contemporary dance work, which was very exciting. And I mean, that was exciting because the contemporary style that was coming from America at that point, you know, from companies like Martha Graham and Merce Cunningham, that very often was taking place in empty space. So lighting became scenery. It took on a scenic role in a way that perhaps, you know, I think it's fair to say was relatively new. It also opened up what you could do, what you were allowed to do in a sense with light, because it was just dancers and light, a lot of it. Not everything, but a lot of the pieces that I was working on were just about space and light. And that's in a sense what moved me from thinking of myself purely as a set and lighting designer to being known much more as a lighting designer. I sort of deviated a bit there, but
actually you answered to my next question, because being in your roots and talking about your roots and beginning of your career, dance is very remarkable. Was it? Do you feel in dance like a solo artist more than in opera? Because sometimes we do not see a set design in dance at all. We see most of the things. Sometimes most of the things are based on light, on purity, on minimalism. So you are a soloist. In opera, you are usually a part of the big creative team.
No, I mean that's true. Although obviously there are lots of dance works that do involve in set and other designs, very often costume designs as well. But yeah, I mean I think a lot of the work, certainly then and probably still now, in terms of contemporary dance, is quite abstract. It's not. I mean, I've done lots of ballets where we're telling specific stories, but a lot of it then certainly was, if you like, dance about dance. So it was more like an abstract painting. So it very much opened out an area where I could work quite abstractly as well in response to it. So it was more like, it was very close to working on a painting, if you like. So I could paint the air and the dancers and work in that kind of way. So yeah, it in some instances, it takes away, I guess, a layer of collaboration, in the sense that there might not be a set designer on board. Or sometimes it was me, but so yeah, I hear what you're saying. You take on a slightly different, closer to the front, maybe that's what you mean, that the design becomes, the way the stage look becomes entirely about the lighting design, and obviously the dancers. So yeah, and I think that opened up a lot of opportunity during that period of time, particularly in the 80s, when people started noticing lighting design in a different way, seeing that it actually fulfilled what I would call, say, a scenic role. And that kind of worked well for me, because having trained as a set designer, one had a sense of space that you could then apply lighting design to, and make it, use it in a sculptural way, use it in all sorts of different ways. So I think that was a very important period for me in terms of development. I mean, now I work very broad. I work with plays and with dance and ballets and opera fairly equally, which is, I find I'm very fortunate in that sense. But I think it was that period of time working with dance where, as you say, in a sense, the lighting design very much came to the front, where you could then take that on and apply it. I mean, people often ask, what's the difference between opera and plays and dance? And there are differences in terms of the way they're presented as performance. But now I find that I can mix up styles. So things that you would never have used on a play in the past, that I would have used within a dance context, I can now use in opera and plays, and mix up the techniques in that sense, even though there are obviously differences.
Thank you, Peter. It was incredible to talk to you, and that's a pity we do not have you live in tonight's discussion. But I hope all our spectators and audience will watch this video and will have impression and nice touch with you virtually. Hopefully, we'll meet again, maybe soon in Vilnius again, to be as lucky as we could be having you on stage with Vilnius City Opera.
Well, it's one of my favorite places to be. So give my love to everybody in Vilnius. And yeah, I hope we'll be together properly soon. That'd be lovely.
Best regards and warmest regards to you.
And good, great. Have a great day. I hope the event goes really well.
Great, thank you.
Take care.